2 days later, the feast that Doran was hosting was not a mere dinner. It was theater, a performance of politics, power, and pleasure dressed in silk and spiced with intrigue. The Hall of the Sun had been transformed, hung with sheer curtains dyed in sunset hues. Braziers crackled along the walls, filling the air with the scent of cinnamon bark, cloves, and citrus oil. Rose petals floated in shallow golden basins between columns, and soft music drifted from a corner where minstrels played high harp and flute, accompanied by a sultry singer whose voice glided like honey over stone. Prince Doran sat at the highest seat, a carved chair flanked by pillars of polished basalt and gold-veined marble. Beside him sat Arianne Martell, her gown the color of a ripe plum, its neckline scandalously low even by Dornish standards. Her neck and wrists were adorned with gold rings and rubies, and her skin gleamed faintly with scented oil. She looked every inch a princess, regal and perfect, but her eyes, those eyes watched. They watched Robb Stark. The young wolf sat to Doran's left, a position of honor that hadn't gone unnoticed. He was dressed in pale gray and black, the colors of House Stark in the north, though softened for Dornish warmth, a high-collared tunic that still spoke of northern austerity. He wore no furs, but a thin cloak of white silk was clasped over one shoulder with the dire wolf of Winterfell. Though the heat continued to turn his white cheeks pink and dampened his curls, he bore it with steady grace. Oberyn Martell, lounging further down the table, was dressed in a flowing robe of gold and orange, eyes alight with mischief. Beside him were the sand snakes, in varying states of disarray and grace. Illyria sat by his side, treating herself to some grapes. The hall buzzed with voices, Martell bannermen, lords from the green blood, courtiers and ladies, servants moved about everywhere, and even minor nobles and emissaries from Essos or the Stepstones. Sigils and banners from most of the easternmost houses were present, such as houses Illyrian, Jourdain, Toland, Dalt, and Gargalen. Some were more subtle than others in their interest in the Northmen present. Food was everywhere, skewers of salted lamb, bowls of saffron rice, chilled melon slices, platters of fried peppers served with cheese and herbs. Goblets were never empty. Wine flowed like water. Doran raised his cup high. Tonight, we welcome the heir of the north, Robb Stark of Winterfell. May this be the first of many nights we break bread together, not as strangers, but as kin. The hall echoed with polite cheers, applause, and murmurs. Eyes darted to Doran's left. Robb stood briefly and bowed his head, some of his hair covering his blue eyes. I thank you, Prince Doran, for your hospitality, your welcome, and your faith. The North remembers its friends and honors them. As he sat down, Oberyn's voice rang out. Well said, young wolf. But let us test this memory you speak of with something stronger than words. The prince clapped, and from behind a sheer curtain emerged 3 women. Courtesans, clearly, exquisite in silks that barely veiled their bodies, anklets chiming, hair perfumed. One was dusky-skinned with kohl-lined eyes and wide hips that swayed like sails in wind. The second, pale with red-gold curls, a foreigner perhaps. The third had long black hair and striking green eyes. All 3 moved toward Robb with feline grace. Jon Snow, seated a little ways down the table beside Jory Castle and Sarella Sand, stiffened. He leaned slightly toward Jory. Is this a test? Jory muttered, sipping his wine. He was praying in his mind to the old gods for Robb's sake. Or a game. Oberyn plays both the same way. The red-haired courtesan reached Robb first, bending low to offer him a goblet of golden wine. Her fingers brushed his as he accepted it. They say northern men are cold, she said, her voice low and smoky. But I've never believed it. I think you want to find out, Robb said dryly, taking a polite sip and gently handing the cup back. The black-haired girl had seated herself beside him without invitation. You've tasted Dornish wine, she said, running a finger along the stem of a figure. But there's so much more to taste here. Have you ever had sweet fruit fed to you from another's lips? Robb coughed lightly. Not as such. His cheeks were bright pink now, sweat glistened his brow. Would you like to? He glanced to the side. Across the table, Arianne had frozen in mid-bite of a honey-drizzled date. Her eyes did not blink, but her jaw set ever so slightly. Oberyn smiled lazily. Come now, nephew-to-be. No harm in a little teasing. You are not yet wed. and a man in Dorne is allowed to look and touch whoever he wants, is he not? I can look, Robb said evenly. But I've already seen what I like before today. There was a pause, and Arianne's lip curled faintly upward. The feline snarl that was building up dissipated, and she looked neutral again. The courtesans were nothing if not professional. They laughed like wind chimes, took their leave with grace, and melted back into the perfumed haze. Robb turned back to his plate and tore off a piece of flatbread, letting the moment pass without further comment. Oberyn raised a brow. Robb couldn't tell what he was thinking. A tame wolf? No, Robb said calmly. A loyal one. A murmur passed through the hall. A few raised brows, some impressed nods. Even some of the older lords looked at him with slightly less condescension than before. Though many were greatly confused, Oberyn spoke true and they agreed with his logic, so they weren't sure why Robb wouldn't entertain his last days as a bachelor. Doran said nothing for a time, but his cup paused at his lips and his eyes rested on Robb with that deep, unreadable quiet. Jon leaned toward Jory again. Was that good? Jory gave a strong nod. Very good. Oberyn meant to rattle him. Didn't work. Across the table, Arianne flicked her tongue across her lips and drank long from her goblet. She hated that she'd felt that flicker of heat. Jealousy wasn't her style. She was the one who turned heads, who made men fluster. She's the one who tempted all. Yet when those women approached Robb, she had felt what? A spark of warning? Or something stronger? Later in the evening, the feast slowed to music and more wine. The nobles had begun to cluster about, lords murmuring about the free cities, young knights boasting of tourneys and duels, courtiers sharing sly gossip. Arianne wandered near the open terrace off to the side, where the sea breeze cooled the night air. She leaned against the balustrade, looking out at the lights of the city and the sheer dark of the country beyond. She sensed him approach before he spoke. You handled that well, she said without looking. Robb joined her, careful to keep a respectful distance. I've danced with more ruthless people before. His mind went back to his stay in King's Landing, and a certain blonde-haired family. She glanced at him, one eyebrow arching. Those women could have devoured you whole, and spat you back out just as easy. I'd rather face their wiles than Oberyn's spear again. She smiled at that. You really think he was testing you? I know he was. Just as your father was watching how I'd react. He paused, then looked directly at her. And as did you. She met his gaze, bold and unafraid. And what did you see, Robb? He thought for a moment. Someone who enjoys games, but doesn't like losing. Arianne tilted her head, eyes teasing. Do you think I was jealous? He said nothing. The corner of his mouth peeked up a little as he fought to hide a grin. Don't flatter yourself, she said, but there was no sting in her voice. You're not the first boy I've ever had eyes for. Robb chuckled, not allowing himself to think too deep about that comment, lest jealousy would take hold of him. Though he still noticed that she admitted to having eyes for him, which he took as a win. They stood in companionable silence. Below them, torches lined the streets, and far off, the sea lapped at the base of the shore with rhythmic insistence. You were right, earlier, Robb said. This isn't just marriage. It's war, or a precaution against war. You speak like a man twice your age. I had to grow fast. My father didn't raise me for court, but for duty. Good, she said. Because duty is everything here. In Dorne, we don't marry for banners. We marry for survival. For leverage. And if there's pleasure to be had, well, that's a lucky bonus. Is that how you see this? I don't know yet, she admitted. You're not what I expected. I thought you'd be all gruff honor, aggression, and bluster. Like your northern kinsman. But you're quieter and more earnest. Kind of like ice, you only crack when pressed. He looked down, smiling slightly. And you're not what I expected either. Oh, you thought I'd be a spoiled princess who pouts when her slippers get dusty. I thought you'd be sharper, he said. Don't get me wrong. But you also care a great deal, and that's more dangerous. She stepped closer, not quite touching, but near enough he could smell the orange blossom in her perfume. Careful, wolf, she said. You might be starting to like the heat. I already do, he replied softly, eyes keeping to her face, almost as if you held her with just his gaze. She looked up at him, lips parting slightly, then drew back a breath and turned, her skirts swirling. Come, the feast isn't over. And if you survive the dancing, maybe I'll show you more by moonlight. He followed her inside, his heart beating a little faster. He can feel his pulse thumping in his head as a tick of adrenaline began to run through him. Oberyn watched them from his cushioned seat off to the side, sipping his wine. Dangerous, that one, he said to no one in particular, his voice not filled with concern but hope. Illyria leaned toward him, her voice soft and amused. Which one? Both. An hour later. The corridors of within the palace at night were hushed, lit by soft glowing lanterns and torches that flickered with each sea breeze that found its way through the high windows. The air was warm, scented with jasmine, salt, and something spiced, maybe the last traces of the feast or the perfume in Arianne's hair. Robb Stark walked beside her, his steps quiet on the mosaic tiles and sandstone. Heart still beating with the pulse of wine brought courage and conversation. They had danced, with each other and others. They talked with Jon and Jory, Arianne hearing more of the North and Robb's family much to his embarrassment as Jon went into one particularly funny episode when he was 9. They talked with Tyene and Nymeria, who kept flirting with Robb despite him being betrothed to their cousin, wondering if Arianne would like to share perhaps. She declined with an amused smirk. They left soon enough. Arianne said little as they went, though she occasionally glanced his way. He was watching everything. The arching ceilings, the silk curtains swaying like ghosts, the burnished bronze doors. His shoulders were stiff, but not out of discomfort. He was alert, a wolf far from the woods. When they reached her chambers, 2 guards in martel colors stood outside holding shields and swords at their waists. She offered them a smile and a quick word, and they bowed before disappearing into the shadows of the hall, dismissed for the night. Robb blinked. You wish to be alone? I'm never alone in Sunspear, she said, brushing her fingers against the painted door. But I sent them away. I thought I'd like some privacy. She paused. And I thought you might like that as well. I was raised to escort a lady to her door, Robb said, though his voice had a hint of wariness. Not past it. She pushed the door open anyway and turned to him. Then perhaps you weren't raised Dornish. He hesitated. Fair enough, though I'm not. Wholly opposed. Arianne stepped inside, pausing in the doorway. The glow of lanterns lit her from behind, golden light touching her hair, her cheekbones, the smooth curve of her throat. You could come in, just for a moment. It's still hot. I was going to bathe. Robb's jaw tensed. Then I should leave you to it. His feet twitched backwards instinctively. She tilted her head, her plump lips pouting. Why? Afraid of what you might see? Or what you might want? He didn't move. He didn't dare. She grinned happily like a cat. Just a few minutes, Wolf. Unless you truly think yourself that fragile. That got him. With slow, deliberate steps, Robb followed her inside. He kept his right hand within his left behind his back, looking too serious for such an intimate setting. Her chambers were airy, filled with soft cushions, carved screens, and gauzy drapes that shifted with the breeze. On a low table, a decanter of pale wine caught the candlelight. There was a deep stone basin sunken into the floor in one corner, down a small private hall, half filled with steaming water, petals floating on its surface. A servant must have drawn the bath just before the feast ended. Robb stood by the door, as if afraid moving deeper might trigger some kind of trap. Arianne walked to a low bench and, without ceremony, undid the clasps at her shoulder. Robb looked away sharply. Arianne laughed at the sight. He had already seen her nude at the pools. You said you could look earlier, she teased over her shoulder. But you're not. He turned his head slightly towards a window, still careful not to stare. You're testing me. She let the silk fall, slow, sinuous, and stepped out of it. Beneath, her body was smooth and golden, toned and voluptuous, and utterly bare. A slender waist, wide hips, and a shapely rear caught his peripheral vision for a moment. He choked back a cough, eyes flicking up toward the ceiling. Arianne walked toward the bath, her bare feet softly padding across the expensive tile. In Dorne, we don't hide our bodies like secrets. Especially not from our betrothed. She stepped into the bath with a quiet sigh, settling into the water like a goddess returning to her element. Steam curled around her face, trailing up her neck. Robb stood rigid, every muscle tense. You're making this very, very difficult. Good, she murmured, drawing her knees up, water lapping at her smooth, sun-kissed thighs. If it were easy, I might think less of you. He finally looked at her, carefully. She wasn't smiling now. Not a smirk, not a tease. She was watching him with those brown, endless eyes, testing more than his control. She was testing his desire, his will, his self-control, his loyalty, his very nature. Robb exhaled slowly, breath leaving his mouth like a whisper. "I'm not a boy, Arianne." "No," she said. "You're a man. And you're mine, or you will be. So I wanted to see." She rose slightly in the water, arms glistening, fingers dragging her hair back and exposing her perked-up breasts. "How strong is your honor when it's tempted, when it aches?" His fists clenched at his sides. He can feel his blood pulsing down his chest and waist, and knew what kind of a reaction his body will traitorously show. She softened, then, just a little. "You are not what I expected either, Robb Stark. You did not touch those courtesans. You didn't leer. You didn't boast. I thought you might be dull, a northern bear in a lion's court. But you have surprised me again and again. And you're not done trying," he said hoarsely. "Not even close." She stood up fully, water sheeting down her body, candlelight kissing every curve. Robb shut his eyes and turned away, jaw locked, throat tight. She was nothing like any girl he's seen up north. She was beauty incarnate. "I should go." "Maybe," she said. "Before you do." He was already at the door, hand on the wood. "Robb," she said softly. He turned slightly. "You want me?" His eyes opened. He nodded to himself slightly. "Yes." "Then when I choose to give myself to you, I want to know it wasn't just because I undressed in candlelight or sat you beside my bath. I want to know you chose me, not lust or greed." Their eyes met across the space between steam and shadows. "And when I come to your bed," she added, voice like velvet over steel, "you won't walk away, you won't shun me." "I won't." And he opened the door and stepped out into the corridor, breathless. Behind him, the door closed like a heartbeat.